You wake up already carrying the weight of the day before you even leave the bed. Nothing extraordinary has happened, nothing has gone dramatically wrong, and still there is a persistent sense of weariness, as if something inside you is constantly pressing against life itself, creating friction where there shouldn't need to be any. You try to organize everything, to plan better, to think more clearly, to be more rational, more composed, more prepared for whatever might come next. But the more you try to align the world with your expectations, the heavier everything feels. You're not tired of life. You're tired of fighting it. Tired of waiting for people to behave differently. Tired of feeling frustrated when things don't unfold the way you imagined. Tired of putting in effort, discipline, intention, and still sensing that reality never quite cooperates. This exhaustion doesn't come from having too many problems. It comes from a quiet, constant resistance to what is unavoidable. The Stoics understood this long before us. They saw that human suffering does not emerge from the chaos of the world itself, but from the inner conflict between what happens and what we expect to happen. As long as we try to force life into our personal designs, we drain ourselves. As long as we demand that everything makes sense on our terms, peace remains out of reach. Here, there are no motivational slogans, no empty promises, only a more honest invitation to learn how to stand before life with greater firmness, clearer judgment, and far less inner friction. If you feel the need to slow down internally, to strengthen your mind, and to move through your days with more balance, stay here. This space is built for those who seek clarity, not distraction, depth, not noise. Now take a breath, be still for a moment, and continue. Chapter 1. The exhaustion of fighting everything. There is a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from excessive movement, but from the inability to rest internally. It isn't the body that is asking for rest. It's the mind that never grants itself permission to stop. Even in moments of calm, something inside you remains alert, as if relaxation itself were a hidden danger. This fatigue does not arise from a single event. It doesn't require a major loss, a visible failure, or a dramatic crisis. In fact, it often appears when everything seems relatively stable, when life is moving forward, when nothing obvious appears to justify the weight you carry. And that is precisely why it feels so confusing. You look around and can't find a clear reason. Your life is not collapsing, you're functioning, you're meeting responsibilities, you're keeping things together, and yet everything feels effortful. Every decision drains energy. Every interaction leaves behind a trace of tension. Every day feels heavier than it logically should. The most common mistake is to interpret this state as weakness, laziness, or lack of purpose. But Stoicism offers a more uncomfortable and more accurate explanation. You are not weak. You are exhausted from resisting what does not belong to your control. The modern mind has been trained to react to everything. News, opinions, expectations, silent comparisons. Everything becomes a stimulus. Everything demands a response. You adjust, correct, explain, anticipate, often before you realize you're doing it. You live as if constantly evaluated by an invisible authority that never offers approval. This posture creates the illusion of control, but at a high cost. The mind remains in a permanent state of alert. There is no real rest, only shallow pauses. Even when you stop, something inside you continues to struggle with the past, the future, and possibilities that may never arrive. The Stoics saw this clearly. For them, the greatest human exhaustion did not come from external difficulty, but from internal resistance to reality itself. Not physical resistance, but mental refusal. A quiet insistence that life should behave according to personal preference. You fight time, wanting it to move faster or slower. You fight people, expecting them to meet standards they never agreed to. You fight the past, revisiting decisions as if they could still be rewritten. You fight the future, trying to anticipate every loss, every threat, every possible mistake. And the more you fight, the more tired you become. Not because life is cruel, but because you have turned everything into a battlefield, even what simply exists. Stoicism begins exactly here, not by offering comfort, but by offering clarity. It teaches that some things respond to your actions and some never will. When this distinction disappears, everything becomes personal responsibility. Everything becomes failure. Everything becomes weight. Living this way is unsustainable, and as long as you continue fighting everything, you will keep calling exhaustion what is, in truth, prolonged resistance to the inevitable. Chapter 2. The confusion between action and resistance. There is a subtle distinction that few people ever learn to recognize, yet it changes the entire way one experiences life. The difference between action and resistance. On the surface, they appear similar. Both require effort, both consume energy, both create the sensation of doing something about life. Internally, however, they are opposites. Action responds to what depends on you. Resistance fights what does not. In modern life, this boundary has almost vanished. You are taught that everything can be adjusted, optimized, fixed. That frustration is a planning error. That pain indicates a failure in execution. Gradually, reality begins to feel like a personal project that must succeed. When something deviates from expectation, you don't simply act, you resist. Emotionally, mentally, silently. You replay conversations, rewrite decisions, construct alternate versions of reality where things went differently. This resistance does not change facts. It only consumes you. The Stoics understood that suffering intensifies when these two postures are confused. Action is natural. Resistance is optional. Action is connected to character and virtue. Resistance is tied to attachment, expectation, and outcome dependence. When you act, there is steadiness. When you resist, there is tension. And tension, when sustained, becomes erosion. It doesn't explode, it accumulates. Over time, you begin to notice something unsettling. Even success feels exhausting. That happens because you were never simply acting to do what was right. You were trying to guarantee an outcome that was never fully yours to command. Stoicism does not teach passivity. It teaches precise action, acting fully where you have power and releasing what you do not. Until you separate these two, you will continue mistaking effort for suffering. You will believe you are tired because you do too much, when in reality, you are tired because you never let go. Chapter 3. When control turns into a prison. The desire for control often disguises itself as responsibility. You tell yourself you must anticipate, manage, prepare, prevent. At first, this feels like prudence. Over time, it becomes constant surveillance, and constant surveillance is exhausting. The mind turns into a guard that never sleeps. Everything is analyzed. Nothing passes without judgment. Even moments of neutrality are filled with silent anticipation of what could go wrong. Here, Stoicism is precise. Control stops being a tool and becomes an identity. You don't simply try to manage life. You feel responsible for everything. And when something escapes your influence, it feels like an internal failure. This is the invisible prison of control. You believe you are protecting yourself, but you are actually confining your mind to endless vigilance. The world does not adjust to your attention. It moves according to its own rhythms, its own forces, its own wills. The Stoics were direct about this. Attempting to control what does not depend on you is an error of judgment, not of intention. No one does this out of malice. They do it out of fear, fear of loss, fear of suffering, fear of not being enough. But fear does not diminish under control. It spreads. You begin to confuse control with strength. Yet for the Stoics, true strength was never about mastering the world. It was about not being internally ruled by it. There is a profound difference between governing your conduct and trying to govern reality. One is possible, the other is draining. When you fail to distinguish the two, life becomes a state of permanent tension, where rest is never fully allowed. That is why even when everything seems under control, relief never arrives. Control is never complete. There is always another variable, another risk, another unknown. When this illusion is released, something shifts. Action becomes cleaner, effort becomes quieter, the prison begins to loosen. Not because life becomes predictable, but because you stop demanding what it never promised to deliver. Chapter 4. Acceptance that strengthens, not weakens. Acceptance is one of the most misunderstood ideas in philosophy. Many confuse it with resignation, passivity, or lack of ambition. They assume that to accept is to give up strength. Stoicism teaches the opposite. Acceptance is not inaction. It is the end of useless resistance. To accept does not mean to approve. It means to recognize. Some things exist without needing your agreement. Delays happen. People disappoint. Plans fail. Time passes. None of this is a personal accusation. Suffering begins when facts become indictments. When you believe something went wrong because you were not enough, didn't anticipate enough, didn't control enough. The Stoics never asked anyone to enjoy what happens. They only asked that you stop adding a second layer of suffering by mentally arguing with what is already real. Reality does not require approval, only acknowledgement. When you stop fighting it internally, a large amount of mental energy is released. That energy does not disappear. It transforms. It becomes clarity instead of tension, response instead of reaction, stability instead of inner chaos. Acceptance does not erase pain, but it prevents pain from becoming disorder. You feel it. You recognize it. You move through it without losing coherence. Much of exhaustion comes from refusing limits. The limits of time, of people, of circumstance. Acceptance begins when you stop asking life for guarantees it never offered. You act with intention, without tying your inner stability to outcomes. That is a refined form of strength. Acceptance is saying, this happened, not as defeat but as lucidity. Chapter 5. Remaining whole in the middle of chaos. Life does not organize itself around preserving your inner balance. It unfolds. If your peace depends on cooperation from the world, it will never be stable. For the Stoics, inner integrity had to exist independently of external conditions. Remaining whole does not mean remaining calm at all times. It means not fragmenting internally when difficulty appears. Daily chaos is subtle. A comment, a delay, a small but symbolic loss. When the mind is already tired from resistance, even minor disruptions feel overwhelming. Strength lies in the pause, in the space between what happens and how you respond. You do not prevent the world from being unstable. You only prevent instability from deciding who you become. The Stoics called this inner governance, not rigid control but conscious orientation. You do not allow every external movement to dictate your inner posture. Remaining whole is not hardness, it is preservation. Chapter 6. The end of the unnecessary struggle. There comes a moment when struggle stops being courage and becomes attachment. The unnecessary struggle is internal. It is the silent fight against the fact that things are as they are. The end of this struggle is rarely dramatic. It begins quietly. When you stop arguing with the past, when you stop demanding explanations from reality, your actions become more precise, your energy becomes more selective. You stop blaming yourself for what was never yours to control. Life does not become easier, it becomes more bearable. Perhaps something became clearer along this path. Perhaps you recognized a struggle you have been carrying for too long. If something here found space within you, allow it to remain, observe it, carry it quietly. And if at any point you recognize something about yourself, let that recognition exist, not as obligation, but as reflection. There is nothing more to add now, only to remain.